They say she never left the porch, not once, just sat there wrapped in a sun-bleached shawl, rocking slowly day after day for nearly 30 years. The locals whispered stories when they passed the edge of that crumbling Virginia property, careful not to stop. They said her eyes were glassy, like fogged-over mirrors, staring straight ahead, but not seeing anything at all. But what really haunted them was what she whispered. Not prayers, not nonsense. Just one name, over and over. The same name her brothers had. The same name her father had. The same name they all shared. That house, that rotting relic off a dirt road most maps forgot, had once belonged to a family who didn't believe in leaving. Not the land, not each other. The Barkley lineage dated back to colonial days, but they stopped marrying outsiders long before the war between the states. They believed in keeping the bloodline clean, but what they bred instead was something monstrous, something desperate, and what happened inside those walls wasn't just taboo. It was a tragedy so twisted, even time itself seems to have tried to erase it. It all began with a girl. One girl. The only daughter of a man who had no other option and no intention of letting go. She was born into silence, and she grew up surrounded by men who believed she was theirs, not just in name. Her mother died when she was 12, or at least that's the story they told, but no grave was ever marked, and no one ever asked questions, because the questions in places like that were more dangerous than the answers. The Barkleys didn't go to town, they didn't send letters, but the mail still came. Unpaid taxes, county notices, faded warnings from social workers who never made the trip twice. What went on inside the Barkley home became a kind of rumor that bled into legend. People knew something was wrong, they just didn't know how deep it went. And when someone finally got inside that house, they didn't find a family. They found something else. Something broken. Something that shouldn't have been alive at all. When authorities finally stepped through the door of the Barkley home in the fall of 1981, they weren't prepared for what they saw. Not even close. The walls were the color of rot. The air stank of mildew and something sharper, something animal. Furniture had collapsed under the weight of years, and everything was cloaked in layers of dust and silence. But the silence didn't last. Somewhere upstairs they heard movement, a dragging sound, then the thud of bare feet on warped floorboards. They found her in the corner of a room that barely had light. Her name was Ellen. At least that's what she called herself, though later documents would show that wasn't her birth name. She was thin, almost translucent, with stringy hair down to her waist and eyes that looked through you. And around her neck hung a rusted chain, looped loosely, the kind you'd use to tether a dog. She didn't speak at first, just stared, until one of the deputies asked if she was alone. She blinked, then said, "No, they're still here." What followed was months of investigation, but the truth had been buried under generations of silence, lies, and closed doors. The Barkley name hadn't appeared on any school rosters. No hospital had records of their births or deaths. Even the local census listed them only once, back in 1940. 6 individuals all living on the same property, all with the last name Barkley, and 3 of them were under the age of 10. What authorities pieced together came mostly from Ellen. She spoke in fragments, between long spells of confusion and trauma-induced catatonia, but what she said painted a picture more disturbing than anyone expected. The family didn't just isolate themselves, they consumed themselves. Children were born with no documentation, no schooling, no connection to the outside world, and the roles of brother, father, uncle, and husband had long since blurred into something else. Ellen had been shared. From the age of 13, she was passed between her father and brothers as if she were not a daughter at all, but property. Her mother's fate, she hinted, was the same, until one day she went into the ground, and no one ever spoke her name again. That silence, that was the family rule. Speak and suffer, disobey and disappear. By the time the last Barkley man died of illness in the mid-70s, Ellen was the only one left, but not alone, because she'd had children too, and none of them ever left the house. They found the children in the basement. There were 3 of them, or at least 3 that were still alive, no birth records, no school enrollment, not even names in the legal sense, just 3 pale, thin bodies crouched in the dark like shadows with bones. The oldest was maybe 16, but his eyes were like a newborn's, wide, uncomprehending, empty. The other 2 didn't speak at all. They hissed. One crawled on all 4s, his limbs malformed, as if his body had given up halfway through trying to be human. Doctors later confirmed what everyone already feared: severe congenital defects, bone fusions, missing teeth, distorted skull shapes. Their DNA, when tested, was so genetically similar that the lab assumed an error. But it wasn't a mistake. These children were the product of generations of incest. Multiple overlapping lines of parentage and sibling breeding had collapsed the Barkley genome into something fragile, something fractured. And Ellen, she still called herself their mother, but also, sometimes, their sister. No one knows how many children were born in that house before authorities intervened. Some were likely buried behind the property beneath makeshift crosses that had long since rotted away. Neighbors recalled strange sounds in the woods, the occasional glimpse of figures darting through the brush. One man swore he saw a girl, no older than 5, with hair like straw and eyes that didn't match, staring at him from the trees. But he didn't go after her. Nobody ever did. Ellen claimed the basement wasn't always for sleeping. That years ago, it had been the punishment room. She said her father would bring her down there, tie her to the support beams, and leave her for days. Sometimes, one of her brothers would sneak her food. Other times, he'd stay. There were no lights, just old nails in the walls, rusted tools, and the smell of earth, the key, and of smell that clings to skin and never quite washes off. She said she learned to listen to the footsteps, to know who was coming by the way the floor groaned above. Heavy meant her father, light meant her brother Michael, limping meant her uncle, the one who told her she was special. That word, special, it came up a lot in her interviews. She said they all used it, said it made the hurting feel like love, said it made her believe this was how families were. By the time help came, her reality was too far gone to salvage. The tragedy of the Barkley family wasn't just in what they did. It was in how they were allowed to do it for so long, unnoticed. Forgotten by design. The county records office admitted their files had gaps. The sheriff's department claimed they'd sent officers before, but the roads were impassable during heavy rain, and besides, it wasn't a priority. They're just hill people, one deputy was overheard saying. They keep to themselves. And so they were left alone, left to rot together. But rotting is a slow thing. It doesn't happen all at once. It creeps, over generations, over bloodlines, over moral decay that becomes custom. By the time anyone heard Ellen's story, the damage had already become legacy. And legacy in that house meant inheritance through suffering. No will, no money, no name worth carrying forward. Only scars passed down like heirlooms. Bruises where rings should have been. State custody took the children. They were placed into a secure medical facility where they'd live out the rest of their lives in observation. None of them ever learned to read or write. None of them spoke more than a few scattered words. They reacted poorly to bright lights, to loud noises, to any change at all. One flinched every time a man walked into the room. Another clawed at the walls when left alone too long. Ellen was moved to a psychiatric unit after her initial interviews, but she never adjusted. She'd sit by the window mumbling to herself. Her favorite phrase, the one nurses heard the most, was this. He said I was the key. He said the blood would keep us whole. When asked what that meant, she smiled for the first and only time. They shared me, she whispered, so we'd never be apart. Investigators looking into the Barkley land found old journals hidden in the attic, mostly faded, water-damaged, almost illegible, but one entry stood out. Dated 1937, written in a father's shaky hand. "This family is a gift from God. Outsiders poison the line. Best to keep to our own. Ellen will carry us forward." They had planned it. Not just the abuse, the breeding. It was deliberate, purposeful. They believed they were preserving something, when in truth all they were doing was burying themselves alive, one child at a time. The story made headlines for a few weeks. House of Horror in the Hills, they called it. But like all things too uncomfortable to confront, it faded. Reporters moved on. The county sealed the house. And Ellen, she was forgotten all over again. Buried this time not in the earth, but in the margins of a system that couldn't decide if she was a victim or a perpetrator. But those who read the full case files, the unredacted ones, the ones kept locked away, knew there was more. Authorities found evidence of something older, something that hinted the Barkleys weren't the first in their line to choose isolation. Generations back, before the Civil War, land deeds listed the property under a different name, Greer. A family wiped out in a mysterious fire in 1863 with no survivors, or so it was thought. One surviving daughter, 12 years old, vanished after the fire. That girl's name? Eleanor Greer. It's believed she was taken in by distant cousins, one of them a Barkley, and it was with her that the bloodline shifted, narrowed. From that point forward, every wife had Greer blood, every husband a Barkley. Over time, the difference vanished. They weren't two families anymore, just one name, one house, one womb passed from woman to girl. What haunts the most isn't what they did. It's how normal it must have felt to them. Ellen didn't cry when she talked about the abuse. She didn't even flinch. She recited it like scripture, like a bedtime story retold too many times to sting. It was love, she insisted. It was family. That's the quiet horror of generational trauma. When a child's only understanding of care comes with pain, and pain becomes the only thing that feels like home. What they did to her, what she then passed on to her own children, was a cycle so tightly wound it strangled them all. No schools, no churches, no friends, no mirrors, only each other. And when each other is the only thing you're allowed to know, you stop knowing what human really means. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? If you were born into this, and didn't even know it was wrong? Would you have escaped, or would you have become just like them? Ellen died in 2004. No obituary, no funeral, no family listed. Her body was cremated, her ashes unclaimed. The state buried her paperwork in a closed archive where names like hers were meant to be forgotten. But for those who looked closer, the real horror wasn't her end. It was what she left behind. Inside her room, tucked into a drawer beneath folded clothes no one ever saw her wear, was a single photograph, faded, cracked, black and white. A little girl, maybe 4, sitting on a man's lap. Her dress is dirty, torn at the collar. The man is smiling. She isn't. On the back, in a child's scrawl, are 4 words written in pencil. Me and Daddy Bark. No one knows who Daddy Bark was for sure. Maybe her father, maybe her brother. Maybe, in that house, there was no difference anymore. The name appears in several of the attic journals, sometimes as a joke, sometimes as a warning. In one entry, a boy writes, "Daddy Bark comes at night. Don't pretend to sleep. He gets mad when you fake." That line stayed with one of the lead detectives for years. He later said it was the most disturbing thing he'd ever read, not because of the content, but because of the handwriting. It was too perfect, neat, rehearsed, like someone had made the child copy it over and over again until it was right. The Barkleys didn't just isolate themselves, they built a religion out of blood, a faith with only one rule: obey. The family tree wasn't a tree at all. It was a closed loop, a circle of names repeating, bending in on itself until it snapped. And still, every so often, a local will drive past the edge of that property, now overgrown, reclaimed by the forest. They say the wind carries sounds, whispers, footsteps. Some even claim they've seen someone, a woman in a shawl, still rocking on that porch, even though the porch collapsed years ago. Maybe it's just memory, maybe it's trauma, living on in the land. Or maybe some things never truly die. Not when they've been repeated enough times, not when blood speaks louder than history. Because in the end, Ellen wasn't the last Barkley, just the last one anyone ever found. Time is cruel to the forgotten. Their names rot faster than their bones. And yet, some legacies refuse to fade, not because they're remembered, but because they're repeated in silence behind closed doors in places where no one is supposed to look. Today, the Barkley land is technically owned by the state, though no one's moved to reclaim it. It sits under a canopy of trees that grew too fast and too thick, as if nature itself is trying to hide what happened there. No developers, no tourists, just a crumbling chimney half sunk into the soil and scattered remnants of a house that once held more pain than walls can contain. But every so often, a hiker strays off path. Every so often, a teenager looking to be scared wanders too far into the trees. And every so often, someone finds something. A child's shoe, a rusted spoon, a moldy Bible with names scratched out and rewritten in the margins. One local boy even claimed to find bones, not buried, but arranged. A circle of small jawbones nestled around a pile of broken doll parts. He didn't take them. He just ran. Because stories like the Barkleys don't end when the house falls. They echo, they infect, they leave something behind that stains more than just memory. Trauma that seeps into the wood, into the soil, into the bloodline of a place. It's why some locals swear the land is cursed, why even hunters refuse to cross that boundary. But curses don't always come from ghosts. Sometimes they come from choices, from silence, from the refusal to look at the ugly things that hide in plain sight. The truth is, the Barkleys weren't monsters. They were people. Flesh and blood, just like you and me. And that is what makes this story unbearable. Because if something that twisted, that broken, can grow unchecked behind just one front door, then how many more doors are out there right now, hiding their own versi of Ellen? You won't see them on the news, you won't read them in history books, but if you listen closely, if you really pay attention, you'll hear the creak of footsteps in old wood, the hush of voices saying things no child should ever hear, and the soft, rhythmic rocking of a chair that's been empty for decades. The Barkleys may be gone, but their story isn't over. Because stories like this one, they wait. For someone to look, for someone to ask, for someone like you. And now, you know, end.